Hello everybody, this is Ibrahim Tanner TV. Today's video, I'm going to pull out a couple of segments from the Earn Your Leisure interview on Robert Smith. Robert Smith is considered by many the richest black man in America. And I thought it was a really important, really great interview from Earn Your Leisure. And I'm just going to go over a couple of segments that really explains the government's impact on who wins and fails in America. The government had a really big impact on Robert Smith's success, and I think that was kind of overlooked in the interview by a couple of the commenters up under their post. Seen a lot of people talking about investing and being the first millionaire in their family, and I didn't really see any comments about how the government really propelled him to be the success he is today. But I also understand why Earn Your Leisure audience may have overlooked it. Earn Your Leisure normally does interviews about meritocracy, investing, work smarter, not harder, things of that nature, right? Where you can just work hard and invest and save and really build your portfolio up and build your wealth. I think that's what they thought they were going to get into when Robert Smith came. And that's why I found this interview to be very fascinating, because Robert Smith really explains the role of government in his life. Just a little background information on Robert Smith. For those of you who don't know, he was born December 1st, 1962. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. This is a firm that manages over $92 billion in total assets. He himself is worth $8 billion. In 2019, while giving a commencement speech at Morehouse University, Mr. Smith pledged to pay off all of the graduate student debt and the parents' debt if they took loans out on the students. So Smith gives a little background history on his family. And one very poignant point that he makes is that he's the fourth generation college graduate out of his family. Now, his family comes from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they were uprooted and transplanted into Denver after the Tulsa massacres. And the interesting thing is that when you look on the census back from 1920, about 24% of American freedmen or black Americans were illiterate. And that goes up as the age increases. So if you was over 60, you had like a 60-some% chance of being illiterate. So in the time period where blacks were just now getting educated, right, in a basic way, just being able to read and write, Smith was part of a family that had higher education degrees. Not only was Smith's parents college graduates, but they both held PhDs. He talks about his father being a principal. Now, mind you, this is in the 1960s. And we're still dealing with Jim Crow laws and separate but equal, which was anything but equal. Mr. Smith talks about them not being able to get the snow plows to come down their streets because it snowed a lot in Denver. You had a bunch of snow days. Parents couldn't get to work. The students couldn't get to school. So his father helped petition with a group of men to get their streets plowed. Soon after that, you got Brown versus Board of Education. I'll let Smith explain it.
We were at a time, it was a dawning of, call it the civil rights movement in action. So, there were, we spilled a lot of blood, and a lot of our blood was spilled in the streets. And one of the things we got out of it was Brown versus Board of Education. And now it's like, okay, now we're going to desegregate schools. How are you going to do that when everybody lives in segregated neighborhoods? So it was in Denver and many other places, it was a thing called busing, right? We call it forced busing, but it was busing. And so now, the cities took years, they, bought a bunch of buses, started figuring out, okay, who from this community, who goes to this local school. My dad was a principal at the local school. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to be bused across town to another school. All right. Well, right before this was to happen, some racists didn't think this was a good idea and burned like a third of the buses. Okay. So now all of a sudden, fewer people are going to get bused, just as a nature. So rather than my whole neighborhood getting bused, only one bus came to my neighborhood. And so it just so happened to hit on a corner down the block from me. And so the kids in that 4-block radius were the first ones to go to desegregated schools. Okay. And like I talked about better resource schools. And when I look at the kids who were on that bus versus the kids who were 2 blocks away, okay, it was bus number 13, like I say, ironically, mm-hmm. right? It was those kids have a higher percentage of professionals, went to Ivy League schools, became, doctors and professors and scientists versus just a few blocks away, now there were some professionals that came out of there, but a much lower percentage. I mean, it is a stark contrast. And it's because in that case, K through 6 education was so different than what you saw in our local neighborhoods, because they were still, separate but equal, but it wasn't. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. The teaching, the capacity, the care, and we had some phenomenal teachers in our community, and some of the teachers through that also ended up in those better resource schools because it was that as well. And I remember Mrs. Olivier, third grade teacher, African American woman, and you could only African American teacher in that school, but she looked out for every kid of color in that school. And I'm telling you, that's one of the most important things that made a huge difference in our educational upbringing and gave us a chance to launch and go into the high schools and go into the colleges that we ended up in because we had great fundamental education K through 6.
In 1968, Denver starts the integrated school. That means all of Mr. Smith's formative years would have been spent in an integrated school with better resources. Not only that, he talks about a third grade African American teacher named Miss Olivia that was there that made sure that all of the African Americans in that school got what they needed. And I love the fact that he draws a direct correlation between those who was able to go to integrated schools, becoming professionals and really doing good in their field of work versus those who didn't, right? So many times in our community, we talk about the possibility of doing something, right? But we never really get into the probability. Right here, Mr. Smith is drawing that he's making that direct connection between those who were able to go to school with more resources versus those who didn't. And this doesn't mean that, the African American schools on the black side of Denver didn't have great teachers. They did. They just didn't have the investment that the government gave the white schools. Smith will go on to get an engineering degree from Cornell and an MBA from Columbia. This is the benefit of having affirmative action exclusively be for American freedmen. And this is what President Lyndon B. Johnson intended affirmative action to do, right? And this is what he means in his speech when he says you can't take somebody who's been hobbled by chains, bring him up to the finish line and expect him to win a race, right? We didn't get in this situation by bad decision making. It wasn't up to our own volition. It was the government that enabled us and kept us from getting an education. It was the government that came in and allowed these states and states' rights to do black codes, which we all know now as Jim Crow. It was the government that didn't allow little black American students to go to school during harvest season and says you can only get so much education and then you got to go work the field. It was the government that put us in peonage for not having a job. And Lyndon B. Johnson, he frames this correctly. Only the government can fix the problems that the government created. It won't be done by your own individual will.
So so that's 1.4% of the firms are women, and it's like everybody, like Latinos, blacks, like you just throwing everybody in a bucket.
Yeah, and we only have access to 1.4% of the assets. We make up a little more than 1.4% of the population, though, don't we? And we actually make up a little higher than that in terms of our contributing to the pension plans. Did your parents, are they part of a pension plan?
Yeah, my mom was a teacher for 30 years. So.
Yeah, okay. What's the percentage of black teachers in her union?
Probably a lot.
A little more than 1.4%.
Yeah, a lot, yeah, for sure.
Okay, what about, some of the civil service workers? Probably same thing. What about federal government?
Yeah.
Probably same thing. But yet, we don't control a proportionate share of the assets that our parents put those $62 a week in for pensions. And our parents, go out, work so hard, send us to school, send us to college, get educated, go manage this capital. But yet, they don't get the capital to manage. That, as you know, flows back into our communities at much higher rates than almost anything else. Because as you do better, you typically are enhancing your community at much higher rates than non-people of color. So those are the things we, you and me, have to make people aware and drive these pension plans to make sure they're distributing their fair share to the constituency base that makes up those who are contributing, point number one. And then point number two, to the highest performers, which when you look at, we have a group called the NAIC that's been doing this work for 20 years, evaluating our firms perform at a higher rate, a higher level with lower loss ratios.
African Americans alone make up about 8% of civil sector jobs. We're paying into these state pension budgets, these federal pension budgets, but we don't get to manage it at the same appropriate amount that we pay into it to. These government officials are saying, no, we're not going to give it to the African American firm, even though they would give us a greater return on investment. We're going to go to the people that we've been going to. And this is just one way that government continues to pick who gets to win and who gets to fail.
Again, this whole fourth industrial revolution is changing the economic landscape of this planet. But yet, our HBCUs, 80% of them are in broadband deserts. How are you going to participate if you don't have access to the tool of progress, the principal tool of progress today in the economy? And that is a big problem. And that's one that we decided to take on, and I decided to take on and bring some partners to take on.
In this segment, Robert Smith is talking about the resources you need to be able to compete in what he calls the fourth industrial revolution, and how we were locked out of being able to compete, which enabled us to really be able to grow and sustain wealth. And he's saying that if our HBCUs are in broadband deserts, then we're just not going to have the technology and the ability to not only be in front of this camera, right? Because this is where the small money's made. The big money is made as being behind the apps, behind the software that develop and write code. And what you see now is a lot of those jobs is being outsourced to Asian Americans. I drive past IUPUI every day. That's Indiana University, Purdue University of Indianapolis. And sometimes 100% of the people that's there is Indians, right? I would like from the blocks it take me to drive past the university, I'll just see Indians and Asian Americans. And even when I looked up the enrollment of how many African American students was there, how many Asian students was there, what you found out is that in Indianapolis, a city that's 28 to 30% black, has a smaller amount of students at this major university, the biggest university in the city, than does Asian Americans. And their population is only 4%. So we're being replaced, and that's what affirmative action was not intended to do. And if you don't see some type of intervention, we're just going to be erased. And no amount of TikTok videos or YouTube or IG or OnlyFans or whatever apps you want to go to is going to be able to sustain a community. I thought Earn Your Leisure did a very good job with this interview. I would encourage everybody to go watch it. One thing I really wanted to know is if Robert Smith family qualify for the GI Bill. I kind of feel like they do. You know, it's hard in this day and age to get 2 generations of college graduates in our community. And here's a man who was born in the 60s that was born to 3 generations of college graduates and end up becoming a 4th. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about the video. Let me know what you guys think about my perspective. Like, share, subscribe. Please leave comments in the comment section. Thanks, everybody. Peace.